They laughed at the woman with the mop until she picked up the marker and changed their lives forever. Every morning at 5:30 a.m., before the students of Westfield Advanced Academy rushed through its polished halls, Angela Brooks was already there, mop in one hand, bucket in the other. She moved quietly, like a shadow no one cared to see. To most students, she was just the janitor, the black woman who cleaned their classrooms, emptied their trash, and disappeared before their parents arrived in expensive cars. They never asked about her life. They never wondered why she paused sometimes at the whiteboard, reading the equations left behind. Angela had once loved mathematics. Actually, she still did, but life had rewritten her story. Instead, Angela slowly set down her mop. She walked toward the board with calm, unhurried steps, as if the laughter behind her were nothing more than background noise. The students exchanged amused glances. Ethan crossed his arms, confident this was about to become the highlight of their week. "Go ahead," he said sarcastically. "Show us what you've got." Angela picked up the marker and studied the equation carefully. It was a second-order nonlinear differential equation, layered with substitutions and constraints clearly designed to intimidate. She tilted her head slightly, reading every symbol with precision. The room, once filled with snickers, grew gradually quieter. There was something unsettling about how focused she looked. She didn't rush. She didn't hesitate. She simply began first. She rewrote the equation in a cleaner form, correcting a small notational inconsistency Ethan had made. "You dropped a negative sign here," she said gently, pointing to the second term. Ethan frowned. He stepped closer. Yes, she was right. A subtle mistake, but one that would have derailed the entire solution. A murmur spread across the room. Angela continued. She applied a substitution method, transforming the equation into a separable form. Her handwriting was neat, precise, almost elegant. She explained each step softly, not as if proving herself, but as if teaching. "When you isolate the variables," she said, "you reduce the complexity. Here, the integrating factor simplifies the expression." Of the quieter students leaned forward in his seat. "She's actually solving it," he whispered. Ethan felt a flicker of discomfort. He had spent 2 days wrestling with this problem. He had nearly reached the correct structure, but the algebra had collapsed under its own weight. Angela moved confidently through the transformations, integrating both sides with steady assurance. She paused only once to double-check her constants, then continued. Finally, she boxed the general solution at the bottom of the board. The silence was absolute, no laughter, no whispers, just stunned disbelief. Angela stepped back and placed the marker down carefully. "You'll want to verify the boundary conditions," she added kindly. "This should be the general solution." Stared at the board. He grabbed a notebook and quickly checked her steps. Line by line, it was flawless, not just correct, but efficient. She had chosen a substitution none of them had considered, cutting the complexity in half. A student in the back slowly began clapping. It was hesitant at first, then stronger. Others joined in, until the room filled with applause, not mocking this time, but genuine. Angela looked surprised. "Oh, that's not necessary," she said softly. Ethan swallowed his pride. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. His voice had lost its edge. Angela hesitated for a moment, as if deciding how much to reveal. "Used to teach mathematics," he said quietly, "at the university level." The words hung in the air like a dropped weight. "Used to?" someone asked. She nodded. "Many years ago." No one laughed now. Ethan felt his face grow warm. The assumptions, the smirks, the challenge, they replayed in his mind like a slow-motion mistake. "Why are you?" he began, then stopped. The question felt intrusive. Angela saved him from finishing. "Life changes," she said simply. There was no bitterness in her tone, only acceptance. She picked up her mop again and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused and looked back at the board. "You're all very bright," she said. "Intelligence shines brightest when paired with humility." Then she left. The door closed gently behind her. For a long moment, no one moved. The equation on the board no longer felt like a puzzle. It felt like a lesson, one none of them had expected. Ethan walked to the front and erased his original work, leaving only Angela's solution visible. "We're doing her job for a week," he said quietly. No one argued. The following Monday, the students arrived early. They found Angela already working in the hallway. Ethan approached her, awkward but sincere. "We meant what we said," he told her. "You'll handle room 204 this week." Angela looked at them, the polished shoes, the expensive backpacks, the brilliance they wore like armor, and she smiled. "Very well," she said. But as the week unfolded, the lesson deepened. Cleaning wasn't easy. It required patience, attention, and respect for spaces others used carelessly. The students noticed details they had never seen before: the gum stuck beneath desks, the ink stains on floors, the care required to polish surfaces without leaving streaks. By Wednesday, their laughter had transformed into quiet reflection. On Thursday afternoon, exactly 1 week later, they gathered again in room 204. This time, the board was blank. Ethan held a small envelope. He walked into the hallway and handed it to Angela. "We looked into your published papers," he said softly. Dr. Angela Morrison. Her eyes widened slightly. "You didn't have to do that. We wanted to understand," he replied. The envelope contained a formal invitation. They had spoken with the principal. They wanted her to give a guest lecture to the Advanced Mathematics Club. A real one, not as a joke, not as a challenge, but as a professor. Angela looked at the paper for a long moment. Memories flickered behind her eyes, lecture halls, applause, ambition, loss. Then she looked at the students standing before her, no longer arrogant, no longer mocking, but respectful. "All right," she said gently, "next Thursday." When the day arrived, room 204 was full, not just club members, but teachers and curious students. Angela stood at the front, not with a mop, but with a marker. She wrote a new equation on the board, complex, beautiful, demanding attention. "Mathematics," she began, "is not about proving you're the smartest person in the room. It's about understanding the universe one pattern at a time." The students listened, not because they were challenged, but because they were inspired. And Ethan, watching from the front row, realized something profound. That afternoon had never really been about a differential equation. It had been about perspective, about respect, about the quiet brilliance that walks unnoticed through hallways every single day. And from that Thursday on, room 204 was known for something new, not arrogance, not intimidation, but humility. And whenever someone new tried to show off with a complicated problem, Ethan would simply smile and say, "Be careful. The quietest person in the room might just be the smartest." As she picked up the marker, memories flooded her mind, not faint or distant, but sharp and vivid, as if the years between then and now had folded in on themselves. She was no longer standing in room 204 with a mop bucket at her feet. She was 19 again, sitting beneath a flickering desk lamp in a cramped apartment, her textbooks stacked high like fragile towers around her. The hum of the old radiator blended with the scratch of her pencil against paper. She remembered how numbers had always felt like companions rather than symbols, steady, logical, faithful in ways people sometimes were not. While other students memorized formulas, Angela sought to understand their origins. She wanted to know why equations worked, not just how. Her high school teachers had noticed. Her guidance counselor had cried the day the acceptance letter arrived. Full scholarship, Howard University, Mathematics Department. She could still see the envelope, cream-colored, her name printed in bold black ink. It had felt like destiny unfolding carefully in her hands. The first day on campus had been overwhelming, the red brick buildings, the echo of footsteps in lecture halls, the intimidating brilliance of students who seemed born for greatness. But Angela had never been intimidated by intellect. She thrived in it. Late nights in the library became her ritual. She would sit in the quietest corner, solving problem after problem, until the security guard gently reminded her closing time had arrived. She loved the complexity of abstract algebra, the elegance of real analysis, the strange beauty of differential equations that described motion and change. Her favorite professor, Dr. Williams, had once paused mid-lecture to examine her solution to a particularly challenging proof. He adjusted his glasses, studied her work carefully, and smiled. "You have the mind of a mathematician who could change the world," he told her afterward. The words had settled deep in her heart. She carried them like a hidden medal of honor. By her third year, she was assisting in undergraduate research. She had begun drafting a paper on nonlinear dynamic systems, work ambitious enough to catch the attention of graduate programs. She dreamed of earning her PhD, of standing before classrooms filled with curious minds, of contributing something lasting to the language of the universe. But life, as she would learn, does not always follow logical progression. The call came during her final year. Her mother's voice had sounded weaker than usual. For months she had complained of fatigue, brushing it aside as overwork. But the diagnosis was not something that could be ignored. Aggressive cancer, advanced stage. The doctors spoke in careful tones, but Angela heard the truth beneath their clinical language. Time was limited. Suddenly, equations lost their urgency. Lectures blurred into background noise. Her mind remained sharp, but her heart was elsewhere. She began traveling home every weekend, then missing classes altogether. The scholarship required full-time enrollment and academic performance she could no longer maintain. Hospitals replaced libraries. The sterile scent of antiseptic replaced the comforting smell of old books. She learned new terminology, not from mathematics, but from medicine, chemotherapy, radiation, prognosis. She watched the strongest woman she had ever known shrink beneath the weight of illness. Bills arrived faster than hope. Medical insurance covered only fragments. The apartment they had grown up in felt smaller each month, as if closing in around unpaid notices. Angela sold her laptop first, then her extra textbooks. She took part-time jobs, waitressing, tutoring, cleaning offices at night. Sleep became optional, but even exhaustion could not outpace the disease. On her mother's last lucid evening, they sat together in the dim light of the living room. "You dare give up your mind?" her mother whispered, her voice fragile but firm. "Promise me." Angela had promised through tears she could not control. But promises are complicated things when survival demands immediate sacrifice. After the funeral, there was no dramatic moment of decision, no cinematic farewell to her academic dreams. There was simply necessity. She withdrew from the university quietly, no protests, no appeals, just paperwork processed without ceremony. The scholarship dissolved like mist. Without enrollment, it no longer existed. She told herself it was temporary, that she would return next semester, then next year. But time moved differently once you stepped off a path. Money was scarce. Grief was heavy, opportunities narrowed, cleaning jobs were steady. They did not ask about unfinished degrees or abandoned research. They required effort, not explanation. And so Angela worked. She cleaned classrooms where students debated futures she once imagined for herself. She emptied trash bins filled with crumpled drafts of papers she might have helped write. She scrubbed whiteboards that displayed theorems she could still prove in her sleep. Some nights the ache of what could have been pressed against her chest so tightly she could barely breathe. But she never stopped learning. She could not. On her small kitchen table sat a second-hand laptop she purchased years later with careful savings. The screen flickered just like that old desk lamp once had. She streamed lectures from universities around the world. She downloaded research papers, pausing videos to work through proof step by meticulous step. She filled notebooks with derivations and insights no professor would grade. She corresponded anonymously in online forums, solving problems posted by students who never guessed the woman offering guidance wiped down desks for a living during the day. Mathematics became both refuge and resistance. It was the one territory life had failed to confiscate. Her circumstances could shift. Her job title could shrink. Her bank account could empty. But her mind remained expansive. When she solved an equation, she felt whole again. When a complex proof unfolded beneath her pencil, she felt aligned with the version of herself she once envisioned. There were moments of bitterness, yes, moments when she wondered what publications might have borne her name, what classrooms might have echoed with her lectures. But bitterness never lingered long. Numbers did not permit self-pity. They demanded clarity, focus, logic, and in their silent consistency, she found stability. She kept Dr. Williams' words written inside the cover of her oldest notebook. "You have the mind of a mathematician who could change the world." She traced the sentence with her finger, not as a reminder of loss, but as evidence of truth deferred. She had buried her past not because it lacked value, but because exposing it hurt too deeply. It was easier to let the world assume she had never been more than what they saw, a janitor with polite manners, a quiet woman with careful eyes. No one needed to know about the scholarship, the research, the almost PhD. No one needed to see the nights she still spent unraveling complex systems for no audience but herself. Yet beneath the uniform and rubber gloves, the mathematician endured. She existed in every precise movement, every organized supply closet, every perfectly aligned row of desks. Order was not accidental, it was instinctual. She approached even cleaning with the same methodical care she once gave to proofs. Because mathematics had shaped her thinking permanently, it had trained her to search for structure amid chaos, to believe solutions existed even when hidden. Math was the one thing life couldn't take from her. It lived in the rhythm of her thoughts, in the way she calculated grocery totals before reaching the register, in the quiet satisfaction of balancing her limited budget down to the last cent. It lived in her resilience, because mathematics teaches patience. It teaches that complexity can be reduced, that confusion can be clarified, that persistence often reveals elegance where frustration once stood. And so when she picked up the marker in room 204 that Thursday afternoon, she was not stepping into unfamiliar territory. She was returning to a language she had never truly left. The past she buried was not dead. It was waiting, patient, as constant as pi, as enduring as infinity. Angela studied the board. The classroom buzz faded into a distant hum as her focus narrowed to the equation stretching across the white surface, symbols intertwined like a challenge thrown in arrogance. But to her they felt familiar, almost welcoming. She could sense the impatience behind her, the expectation that she would hesitate, that confusion would cloud her face. But her expression remained calm. She began writing, step by step, carefully, confidently. The marker moved with steady precision, its soft squeak the only sound cutting through the thick air. She rewrote the original equation first, not because she needed to, but because clarity matters. She aligned each term neatly, correcting small structural inconsistencies the students hadn't noticed. That alone caused the first ripple of unease. She simplified expressions with practiced ease, factoring where others had expanded unnecessarily. She substituted variables, strategically transforming complexity into something manageable. Her mind worked several steps ahead, anticipating the shape of the solution long before it appeared on the board. She applied integration techniques most of the students barely understood, choosing a substitution that reduced the nonlinear form into something solvable without brute force. Her method wasn't flashy, it was refined, efficient, elegant. Whispers filled the room. Wait, that's actually right. No, that method doesn't. But it did. One student stood halfway from his chair, then slowly sat back down as the logic unfolded exactly as it should. Angela didn't rush. She didn't perform for them, she simply solved. She isolated the variables, applied the integrating factor with deliberate care, and paused briefly to let the structure settle before continuing. Her handwriting remained steady, each line flowing naturally into the next, as if the equation itself were guiding her. 10 minutes passed, but it felt like seconds to her. She circled the final answer with quiet certainty, correct, not just correct, elegantly solved. There were no unnecessary steps, no wasted motion, no dramatic flourish, just clean, undeniable logic. He set the marker down gently and turned around. The laughter was gone. The smirks had disappeared. The room was silent. But it wasn't an empty silence. It was heavy, the kind that presses against your ears, the kind that forces reflection. Ethan stared at the board as if seeing it for the first time. His confidence had drained, not replaced by humiliation, but by something more unsettling, respect. He walked slowly to the front, scanning each line, searching desperately for an error, a miscalculation, a misplaced constant, but there was none. She used substitution after identifying the hidden separable structure. Someone whispered from the back, "I didn't even see that." Student shook her head. "We were trying to brute force it." Angela folded her hands calmly in front of her. She wasn't waiting for applause. She wasn't demanding acknowledgement. She simply stood there, present, unshaken. For the first time, the students saw her, not as background, not as invisible staff, but as someone formidable. Ethan cleared his throat, but no words came out at first. He had built his identity around being the smartest in any room. Now he understood how fragile that identity truly was. The silence stretched longer, thicker. It wasn't awkward, it was transformative. It was the kind of silence that rearranges assumptions quietly inside your mind. One student slowly closed his notebook, as if acknowledging defeat. Another avoided eye contact, embarrassed not because she had been wrong about the equation, but because she had been wrong about Angela entirely. Finally, Ethan spoke. "That's correct," he admitted. His voice lacked its earlier arrogance. There was no sarcasm now, just truth. Angela gave a small nod. "Mathematics rewards patience," she said gently. "Humility." No one laughed at that. The words landed differently now. They felt instructional rather than defensive, a lesson wrapped in grace. The clock ticked loudly against the wall, each second amplifying the weight of the moment. For some, the silence felt uncomfortable. For others, it felt awakening. They were confronting something rarely taught in textbooks, that intelligence is not always loud, that brilliance does not require an audience, that assumptions are often the greatest errors of all. Ethan stepped back from the board slowly. "How long did that take you?" he asked quietly. Angela considered the question. "About 10 minutes, she replied honestly. He nodded once, absorbing that the problem had taken him days. The difference wasn't just skill, it was perspective. She picked up her mop again, as if nothing extraordinary had happened, but everything had changed. The air in room 204 felt different, cleansed of something invisible yet toxic. No one dared to mock, no one dared to smirk. The silence followed her as she walked toward the door, not oppressive, but reverent. Before stepping out, she paused briefly. "Never underestimate someone simply because you don't know their story," she said softly. Then she left. The door closed with a gentle click. The students remained frozen for several seconds more, staring at the circled solution as though it were a mirror reflecting their own shortcomings. Ethan finally turned to face the group. Erase it, someone whispered. No, Ethan said quickly, leave it, because that solution was no longer just mathematics. It was a reminder, a correction, more powerful than any equation they had solved before. That afternoon, no one boasted. No one challenged another with flashy problems. Their conversation shifted, quieter, more thoughtful. The silence had not been empty, it had been instructive. It had carved something new into each of them. A recognition that knowledge without respect is incomplete, that intelligence without humility is unstable, and that sometimes the greatest lessons are delivered not through lectures, but through quiet competence, the kind of silence that changes people, the kind that lingers long after the board is erased, the kind that rewrites more than equations. Their math teacher, Mr. Collins, had been standing in the doorway the entire time. He hadn't intended to interrupt. He had paused at the threshold when he heard unfamiliar silence, an unnatural quiet from a room usually filled with competitive chatter. What he saw kept him there, Angela at the board, marker in hand, students frozen in stunned attention. He stepped forward now, slow and deliberate, his polished shoes echoing softly against the tile floor. No one noticed him at first. They were too busy staring at the equation circled in confident ink. Mr. Collins adjusted his glasses and examined the work carefully, line by line. His trained eyes scanned for errors, out of habit more than suspicion. But with each step of her reasoning, his expression shifted from curiosity to surprise to unmistakable admiration. He traced her substitution method with his finger just above the surface. She identified the underlying structure immediately, he murmured to himself. His eyebrows lifted higher with each progression down the board. This solution, he said quietly, finally breaking the silence, is more efficient than the one in the teacher's manual. The statement landed like a thunderclap. The students glanced at one another, as if silently confirming they had heard correctly, more efficient than the teacher's manual. Mr. Collins rarely praised anyone so openly, let alone someone who wasn't enrolled in his class. He turned slowly to face Angela, who stood near the front desk with her mop resting against her leg. She looked composed, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, uncertainty, perhaps vulnerability at being so suddenly visible. "Where did you study?" he asked. His tone held no accusation, only genuine interest. Angela hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because saying it aloud felt like reopening a sealed chapter of her life. The room leaned in collectively. She could feel their anticipation, the weight of their curiosity. "Howard University," she said finally, her voice was steady. "Mathematics major." Gasps filled the room, not dramatic, but involuntary, small, sharp intakes of breath from students who had only associated that name with prestige and academic excellence. Ethan's confidence, already shaken, crumbled further. Howard University wasn't casual. It wasn't ordinary. It represented rigor, competition, brilliance. Mr. Collins blinked, processing. "Howard," he repeated almost to himself. "That's impressive." Angela gave a modest nod. She did not elaborate. She did not mention research papers or late nights in the library or the professor who once told her she could change the world. She simply stood there. Ethan swallowed hard. His earlier smirk felt like a distant embarrassment. "Why are you working here?" he asked. The question wasn't cruel now, it was confused, perhaps even ashamed. She met his eyes calmly. There was no resentment in her gaze, no trace of humiliation, just clarity. "Because sometimes life changes your path," she said gently. "It doesn't change who you are." The words settled heavily into the room. They carried more weight than any equation she had solved. No anger, no bitterness, just truth. Mr. Collins studied her carefully, as if recalibrating everything he thought he understood about the quiet woman who emptied his trash every evening. "Did you graduate?" he asked softly, a fair question. An honest one. Angela's expression softened slightly. "I completed 3 years," she replied. "I had to leave during my final year." She did not explain further, but something in her tone discouraged probing. The students exchanged glances again, this time not with arrogance, but with dawning comprehension. They were beginning to understand that intelligence and circumstance are not always aligned, that potential can exist in places they never think to look. Mr. Collins turned back to the board once more, almost reverently. "You approach this like someone who's taught it," he observed. She allowed a faint smile. "I used to tutor undergraduates," she admitted. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. Every assumption he had made that afternoon collapsed inward. He had reduced her to a uniform, to a mop, to a title that fit neatly into his limited perception. He felt small not because she had embarrassed him, but because she had exposed his blindness without trying to. The classroom atmosphere shifted yet again. What had begun as entertainment had transformed into revelation. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. The clock ticked on, but no one seemed eager to move. Mr. Collins finally faced the class. "There's a lesson here," he said quietly, "and it's not just about calculus." His gaze swept across the rows of students. "Never confuse someone's current position with their capability." The words hung in the air, mirroring Angela's earlier statement. Ethan looked at her again, but this time there was something different in his expression, respect tinged with regret. "We didn't know," he said. "It wasn't an excuse. It was an acknowledgement." Angela nodded gently. "You weren't supposed to," she replied. "Most people don't ask." That sentence struck deeper than she intended. The simplicity of it revealed how often she had been overlooked, not out of cruelty necessarily, but out of assumption. Mr. Collins stepped closer to her. "Would you ever consider returning?" he asked. The question carried careful optimism. A door slightly reopened. For the first time, a flicker of emotion crossed Angela's face, not pain, but contemplation. Returning had once felt impossible, like a bridge burned beyond repair. But standing here now, seeing shock transform into admiration, hearing validation spoken aloud, something stirred. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at the board, the elegant solution still gleaming beneath fluorescent light. Then she looked at the students, no longer laughing, no longer smirking, but listening. "I never stopped studying," she said softly. Mr. Collins' eyes widened just slightly. "Then perhaps," he replied, "it's not too late." The idea settled into the space between them, fragile but real. Ethan straightened his posture. "If there's anything we can do," he began, then faltered. He wasn't sure what offering help even meant in this context, but the sincerity was there. Angela noticed. She appreciated it. She also understood something they were only beginning to learn. Life's detours are rarely simple. They require courage to navigate and even more courage to revisit. "We'll see," she said gently. She picked up her mop again, but the gesture felt symbolic now, not diminishing, but dignified. She was not ashamed of honest work. She never had been. But now the room saw what she had always known, that a person's value is not defined by their job title. Mr. Collins addressed the class once more. "Class dismissed," he said quietly. No one rushed for the door. They gathered their things more thoughtfully than usual. A few students lingered, stealing glances at Angela, as if trying to reconcile the image in front of them with the one they had carried moments before. Ethan paused before leaving. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She met his gaze and nodded. Apology accepted. No lecture, no scolding, just grace. As the room slowly emptied, Mr. Collins remained for a moment longer. "You have a remarkable mind," he told her. "It would be a shame if the world didn't see more of it." Angela offered a small, measured smile. "The world sees what it's ready to see," she replied. Then she returned to her work, not diminished, but illuminated. And for the first time since she had walked those halls unnoticed, she did not feel invisible. The next week, something unexpected happened. Angela wasn't pushing a mop. She was standing at the front of the classroom. Mr. Collins had recommended her as a substitute teacher after learning more about her background. The school administration was shocked and impressed. Word spread quickly. The same students who had laughed were now taking notes, listening, respecting. At the end of class, Ethan approached her. "Sorry," he said quietly. "We judged you." Angela smiled gently. Never measure someone's intelligence by their uniform. Years later, Westfield Academy would proudly introduce Professor Angela Brooks, head of mathematics department. But she never forgot the day a joke turned into a lesson, not in calculus, in humility.